So before today's scripture was read, I invited the children to leave for Sunday school. Because as you now know, our scripture for today was a war story, a particularly graphic and violent war story. And I didn't want to have to explain to the children what was going on, and I certainly didn't want to have to apologize to parents for letting the children hear it. And the movie that I'm going to review briefly today is 1917. It was rated R, also for scenes of graphic violence. R, that means that anyone under age 17 who wants to see the movie has to be accompanied by an adult. 1917 is a very violent movie which does not seem to get in the way of everybody wanting to enjoy it. Why do we like these stories? Why are we such suckers for violence, murder, and mayhem? I'm going to begin by retelling the story of Ehud and Eglon as background to 1917. Not only is this story violent, but ironically, this story is supposed to be a comedy. You probably didn't catch that, did you? It's a politically incorrect comedy from our perspective, but it is. The humor gets lost in translation, but I want to give you a taster. Ehud is a Benjaminite from the tribe of Benjamin. And that means in Hebrew, son of my right hand, Benjamin. But we are also told that Ehud himself is a left-handed son of my right hand. Right off, the audience wants to know, how is this left-handed son of the son of a right hand going to take advantage of this lovely confusion? What's more, the obese King Eglon's name sounds like the Hebrew word for, you gotta get this, it sounds exactly like the Hebrew word for fatted calf. So now the Hebrews are asking themselves how a left-handed son of my right hand is going to slaughter the evil fatted calf. And they're all smiling and waiting in anticipation. As it happens, after Ehud delivers Israel's war tax, tribute, to King Eglon, Ehud manages to trick the king's retainers into leaving so that Ehud is all alone with the king and every Hebrew person is sitting on the edge of their seats. Then Ehud grabs his sword, successfully hidden on the wrong right side of his body, and buries it in Eglon's belly, a scene that is repeated in 1917. Ehud then dumps the dead king in a bathroom, shuts the door, and runs. And in Hebrew, the literal translation is like this. Servants came and saw. Look. The doors in the upper room are locked, and they said, look, he must be relieving himself. And they waited a long time, and look, he's not opening the doors of his room. And they took the keys and opened them, and look, their Lord is sprawled on the floor, dead. So then the Israelites, emboldened by Ehud's actions, take on the Moabite army. The Moabite soldiers are said to be vigorous and strong. At least our translation was similar. The Moabite soldiers are said to be very strong men. But here again, the word used can also mean in Hebrew, fat. So in a neat little parallel to their master, all the fat, strong fat, so the Moabite soldiers are struck down to 10,000 of them. All politically incorrect, because we don't talk this way anymore. Anyways, when this story is told, The Israelites, the Hebrews who heard it would have been rolling on the floor. When they finally quieted down, one of the people gathered there for a glass of wine would only have to say, "He was relieving himself." Or the poor person would say, "They were all vigorously fat soldiers." Or one of them would say, "Look." And everyone in the room would break out in laughter again because, oh, what a great story this is. It's so funny. The Oscar-nominated 1917, on the other hand, isn't funny. Not at all. I should show you a clip from that right now.
Mama! England!
You keep hold of me! We need to keep moving! Come on! I can't see! I can't see! Stop! It's a mine shaft! But we have to jump! Come on! No! You're going to have to jump! Just jump! I can't see! You need to trust me! Jump!
Not funny. Not at all. In brief, the story is this. Schofield and Blake, you saw them in the last clip, they have to cross a no-man's land during World War I to warn 1,600 isolated British soldiers that the attack that they're planning, if they carry it out, is doomed because the Germans have actually laid a trap. But this is a death trip through no man's land. And it's underlined throughout in this movie. There are images of burial. There are images of bottomless pits. You saw them. There are images of the hellish inferno. You saw that red glowing fire. At one point, a German airplane, Lucifer-like, cast out of the heavens, crashes out of the sky at the feet of these soldiers. And then after rescuing the German pilot from burning to death, the pilot turns and plugs a knife deep into Blake's belly and kills him. Which is actually the scene in the movie that made me think of this Old Testament passage. Now only Schofield is left. And for the rest of the movie, we're praying with Jean Valjean. Bring him home. Bring him peace. He's only a boy. And later that morning, after navigating Hades and bullets and the river Styx into which you saw him fall, Schofield gets to the 1,600 isolated troops. And some of them survive. You know, why do we throng to see a movie like 1917? Why did the authors of Scripture include such violent stories? Why are we such suckers for violence, murder, and mayhem? Well, you're probably thinking, well, John, these stories are told because they have a deeper meaning, a moral that we have to walk away with. But just because a story has a meaning, Is it the right meaning? Is it so? Consider Ehud and Eglon again. It's quite clear that this story is told, as are all the stories in Judges. If you want violence and mayhem, read the book of Judges. But it's quite clear that this story is told to convince the Israelites to avoid being conquered by worshiping Yahweh and Yahweh alone. It's a deal. If the Israelites, if the Hebrews will worship Yahweh alone, then God is going to give them health, wealth, and peace. 80 years at a time. But beware. You don't worship Yahweh, God is going to abandon you, and you will be conquered by the likes of Eglon. Every time. It's a deal. The problem, of course, is that this isn't true. Whether or not the Jewish people have been faithful to Yahweh over the past 2,500 years, whether or not they've been faithful, their history has almost always been one of suffering, of exile, of persecution, of pogroms, of holocausts. Even now, anti-Semitism all around the world is on the rise, and most of the nations surrounding Israel want the Jewish state quashed. Sadly, meanwhile, the state of Israel has responded to threats not with a heightened level of piety, but with war and military occupation and illegal settlement and confiscation of conquered Palestinian territory, which would be a universally recognized war crime and not peace at all in any other era. So it isn't true that when Israel walks with the Lord in the light of his word, what a glory God sheds on their way. It isn't true that while Israel does his good will, he abides with them still and with all who will trust and obey. It isn't true. We used to sing such meaning for ourselves too and think that God was on our side because we're so good. But that's not how the world turns. Sometimes, maybe even often, evil nations like evil people prosper, and good nations with high ideals fail and are conquered. And what is the moral then, or meaning of 1917? So I sat back and I thought about this a long time. What does this mean? What does this mean? Maybe that heroes can triumph over adversity. Maybe this means that even a hellish war cannot stop a true man. Maybe this movie means doing one's duty. That's the main thing. Maybe this movie means today is a good day to die. Are you ready? You know, for all of its macabre celluloid beauty, 1917 as a movie left me depressed about the human prospect. So why do we throng to see it? Why are we such suckers for violence, murder, mayhem? Well, maybe such stories, and I think this is probably kind of close to the truth actually, maybe such stories excite our basest, most ancient fight or flight instincts that are deep within our evolutionary roots. We get to feel that stuff, that adrenaline, without actually putting ourselves in danger, which is nice. And you know, there must be 101 reasons that the philosophers could give us for the appeal of violence to people like us who mostly live in peace. But here's the thing. If nothing else, both of these stories reinforce something we all know, but what we don't reflect on enough. And whether the authors of these stories intended this message, I'm certainly getting it now. Here's the thing, here's the message that I get out of these stories. War is hell. I do not mean to say that when we're up against some final wall and it's a matter of death camps or the most basic freedoms, I do not mean to suggest we should never fight back. Because at best I am a half-baked pacifist. But I am saying that those who just live by war, countries that make war a habit, who find provocations easily, countries that refrain from using violence to further, well, countries that don't refrain from using violence to further what they think of as the national interest, which is God. Those countries that live by the sword will eventually die by that same sword. This is a different biblical meaning than the one in Eglon and Ehud's story. And it is, I think, much closer to the truth. And sometimes I fear that here in Canada, as a partner to the United States and a partner to NATO, that we are at risk of forgetting that war is hell and that it is not the answer. And we have begun to buy into those myths of the national interest above all other things. The myth that might always makes right. And anyways, we're the West. We'll never lose. 1,000 years. We live in an era where, for meaning, we are inundated by half-truths and excuses and propaganda and fake news. I invite you at this point to remember that even the Bible, as in the story of Eglon and Ehud, even the Bible gets the news wrong. Even the Bible trades in fake news. Be good, God will save you. Ironclad war. No, we have to think way more critically than that, especially about military affairs and war. We live in an era where our neighbor to the south, and as you know, I am a citizen of that great country, the United States. But our neighbor to the south has intervened militarily 100 times in the past 100 years in the affairs of countries in the Caribbean and to its south. 100 American military interventions in 100 years. And you know, when you ask the president or the press secretary, why are we in Nicaragua? Why are we in Haiti? Why are we in Honduras? Why are we in Brazil? Why are we in Venezuela? The Americans answer, well, we're doing this in the interest of democracy. Well, if all those countries got all that help 100 times in 100 years in the name of democracy, well then shouldn't Central and South America be the most democratic and peaceful places in the world by now? We live in an era when our neighbor to the south, the United States, has been at war without end since 2003, just in the Middle East, and only about 5 years since the end of the Second World War, not at war at all. And you know what? For a good part of that time, Canada was there as an ally. For all such violent interventions, the Middle East, where the United States has been fighting a plague, is still one of the most dangerous and unpeaceful places in the world. It doesn't work. It doesn't help. You know, and I don't know how to fix the big geopolitical issues that underlie the war here, and you don't either. But at the very least, when it comes to our prayers, we need to be with Maya Angelou. We'll hear this soon. Who prays, Father, Mother, God, You, the borderless sea of substance, we ask you to give all the world that which we need most. Peace. She's right, but she's wrong. We've learned from the story of Ehud and the Israelites that ultimately God chooses to answer our prayers for peace by making us humans responsible to answer that prayer. It is our responsibility, not God's zapping us from heaven. I love the sentiment in Maya's words. But the sentiment ought not to blind us to our responsibility. There is no trust and obey path that we can sing towards peace. There is no God is on our side narrative that secures our superiority. We should try to learn instead all such little steps as we can make, but we should learn instead by our voting and by our investing, by our politics, by our locker room conversations about fake news and so on and so forth. We should learn in our churches and corporations and schools and churches. We should learn how not merely to pray for peace, but to wage peace ourselves. You know. It's what Jesus